Hey guys, welcome back to Ripestories. In today's r/malicious compliance story from Reddit, what kind of person calls the cops on a disabled veteran for sitting on their own porch? Well, meet Denise, an HOA president who ruled with an iron fist. She tried to fine me into oblivion for my accessibility wheelchair ramp. But when she challenged me to a legal battle, she didn't realize she was picking a fight with the wrong soldier. But the first one is titled, "Gave her a reason to sit at the disabled seat." So the bus I take home is usually filled to the brim. At one stop there was an elderly man with a cane who got on. As the person closest to the doors, I stood up to give the seat to them. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman swooped in the moment I stood up. I was just so shocked of the rudeness. No, she was not elderly or disabled since her bus card didn't announce it was discounted, nor it was hard for her to move around since she was perfectly fine standing up the bus for a few stops ago. Another person thankfully gave up their seat for the old man instead, so now here I am standing beside her. Of course, I would step on her feet accidentally. The bus was swaying quite a lot, and because it's packed, she cannot complain since it can happen. I'm certain she noticed, so by the time there were less people on the bus, I dropped my backpack, which was full of university books and a laptop. In hindsight, that was probably a bad idea, but it was secure and it had no damages. She yelped and annoyingly said, "Excuse me, it's on my feet," roughly translated in my language. I just sheepishly said sorry and moved away, also rotating my arms to signal it was heavy and I couldn't carry it anymore. The last hurrah was picking up my bag and making sure I grazed her shin with my foot before heading out my stop. And yeah guys, if you ever had any interesting situations of patio revenge or malicious compliance in public transport, please feel free to share them in the comments, and while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously. And the next one is titled, "HOA called police on me for wheelchair on my patio." So I'm a disabled veteran and I served 2 tours in Iraq and came home with a spinal cord injury that left me in a wheelchair. It's been a long road of adjustment, but I've built a good life for myself. I work from home as a freelance IT consultant, and I have a great group of friends, and I try to stay active in my community. I don't ask for special treatment, but I do expect to be treated with basic human decency. Well, about 3 years ago, I bought a townhouse in a nice little community. It's a planned development with an HOA, which I know makes some people run screaming in the other direction, but the neighborhood was clean, the dues were reasonable, and the location was perfect for my needs. There's a community center, a pool, a little park area, and most importantly, the townhouse I bought had a first-floor master bedroom and bathroom, which made it accessible for me with just a few modifications. Before I even closed on the property, I did my due diligence. I read through the CC&Rs, the bylaws and the architectural guidelines. I wanted to make sure I would not run into any problems when I needed to install a ramp leading up to my front door. The guidelines had a whole section on exterior modifications, including ramps and accessibility features. The process seemed straightforward. You submit an application to the Architectural Review Committee, they review it within 30 days, and as long as your modification meets certain aesthetic guidelines, like using approved materials and colors, they will approve it. So that's exactly what I did. Before I even moved in, I submitted my application for a wheelchair ramp. I included detailed plans from the contractor I plan to use, photos of the materials, paint samples to match my exterior trim, the whole 9 yards. I got approval in writing from the property management company about 2 weeks later. The letter specifically stated that my application met all architectural guidelines and was approved as submitted. I saved that letter, I saved everything actually, and the ramp was installed 2 days before I moved in. It's a beautiful ramp, honestly. It matches my house perfectly, has nice handrails, and includes a small landing at the top. My contractor did an amazing job. I was thrilled with how it turned out. For the first few months, everything was fine. I met some of my neighbors, got settled into my new home, and started establishing a routine. I would sit out on my little patio in the evenings when the weather was nice, maybe read a book or just enjoy the fresh air. And yeah, life was good. But then I met Denise. Denise was the president of the HOA board. She had held at the position for about 6 years at that point, and from what I gathered from neighbors later, she ruled the community with an iron fist and an overly enthusiastic interpretation of the CC&Rs. She was the type of person who measured grass height with a ruler and sent violation notices if your trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. Our first interaction was memorable. I was sitting on my patio one evening when she marched up to my property with a clipboard in hand. No hello, no introduction, no basic human pleasantries. She just walked up right to the edge of my patio and said, "That ramp needs to come down." I blinked at her. "Excuse me?" "The ramp," She gestured at it with her pen like it was offensive to her very existence. "It was not approved by the board. It's an unauthorized structure and it needs to be removed." I stayed calm. I'm pretty good at staying calm actually. The VA therapist I saw after coming home taught me some excellent techniques for managing my anger, and let me tell you, those techniques got a workout over the following months. The ramp was approved, I said. I have the approval letter from the property management company, and I submitted the application before I even moved in. She shook her head like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "I'm the president of the board. I would know if it was approved. It wasn't. You have 30 days to remove it or you will start accruing fines. $200 a day." And she turned and walked away before I could say another word. I want to take a moment here to emphasize something. I'm a reasonable person. I understand that sometimes paperwork gets lost, communication breaks down, and misunderstandings happen. If Denise had approached me like a normal human being, if she had said something like, "Hey, there might have been a mix-up with your application, can we look into this together?" I would have happily worked with her to sort it out. But that's not what happened. The next day, I received an official violation notice in the mail. Unauthorized structure, 30 days to remove or face fines. I immediately sent a copy of my approval letter to the property management company along with a polite letter explaining the situation and asking them to correct the error. Well, about a week later, I got a response. Mind you, not from the management company, but from Denise directly. She informed me that the approval letter I'd received was issued in error and that the Architectural Review Committee, which she chaired, had never actually reviewed or approved my ramp. So therefore the approval was invalid and I still needed to remove the ramp. Now, I don't know if you know much about disability law, but let me give you a quick primer. The Fair Housing Act is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in housing, and when a disabled person requests a reasonable modification, like, let's say, a wheelchair ramp, the housing provider, including an HOA, is legally required to allow it. They can require you to pay for it yourself, which I did, but they can require it to meet certain aesthetic standards, which mine did as well, but they cannot just say no because they don't like the way it looks or because Denise didn't personally sign off on it. So then I wrote back explaining this and I cited the specific sections of the Fair Housing Act. I was firm but professional. I made it clear that I had followed all proper procedures, received written approval, and that denying my ramp would constitute disability discrimination under federal law. Her response? Another violation notice, this time with a hearing date scheduled for me to appear before the board to appeal my violation. Well, fine, I could play this game. I showed up to the hearing with a folder full of documentation, my original application, the approval letter, and copies of the Fair Housing Act guidelines. Before and after photos of my ramp showing how well it matched the house and letters from my doctor and VA confirming my disability and need for the ramp. I was prepared. Denise was not interested in my preparation. The hearing lasted about 15 minutes and she barely glanced at my documentation. When I mentioned the Fair Housing Act, she got this condescending smile and said something about how those laws were complicated and that the board's legal interpretation was that CC&Rs took precedence on private property matters. One of the other two board members shifted uncomfortably in his seat when she said that, but nobody contradicted her. They voted 3-0 to uphold the violation, and I asked for a copy of the meeting documents and a written record of the decision. Denise looked annoyed but agreed. I also made sure to note for the record that I was formally requesting a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act and that I expected a response within the legally required time frame. She ignored my request entirely. Instead, 2 weeks later I got another violation notice, and this time it was not about the ramp, it was about my wheelchair, and I'm not making this up. The violation notice stated that I was in violation of section 4.7.3 of the CC&Rs, which prohibited storage of personal equipment, recreational items or unsightly objects on front porches, patios, or other areas visible from the street or common areas. Meaning my wheelchair, the one I use every single day to, exist as a mobile human being. But Denise was calling it an unsightly object and demanding I keep it hidden from the view. I want you to understand the absolute absurdity of this. I'm disabled. I use my wheelchair constantly. When I'm inside my house, I sometimes leave my chair on the patio while I transfer to my couch or my bed. Sometimes I sit on my patio in my wheelchair to enjoy the fresh air, but according to Denise, this was a violation of community standards. I was furious, but I kept my cool. I wrote another letter, this time pointing out that my wheelchair was a medically necessary mobility device, not recreational equipment or an unsightly object, and that requiring me to hide it from view was discriminatory under the Fair Housing Act. I again requested a reasonable accommodation, and her response was to send me a fine, $200, for the so-called unsightly object on my patio. And then she called the cops on me. I was home on a Saturday afternoon when 2 officers showed up at my door. They looked embarrassed from the moment I opened it and they saw my wheelchair. Apparently, Denise had called the police on me and reported a so-called unauthorized structure and prohibited outdoor equipment on my property. When I asked the officers what exactly she had complained about, one of them rubbed the back of his neck and said she had specifically mentioned my wheelchair on the patio as an unsightly object that violated community standards along with the ramp. She wanted them to force me to remove both. The officers were apologetic. They explained that they couldn't force me to remove an accessibility ramp on my wheelchair and that this was clearly a civil matter between me and the HOA. One of them, a younger guy, looked genuinely disgusted. He shook my hand before he left and said, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, sir. Thank you for your service." That night, Denise came by again. She stood at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, and informed me that my refusal to comply with the violation notices was being noted and that the HOA would be pursuing all available legal remedies to force me into compliance. Then she said the magic words. She jabbed her finger at me and said, "I demand that you comply with all HOA regulations, every single one, and I expect the same from every property and facility in this community. Rules are rules and they apply to everyone equally." I just looked at her. You want everyone to comply with all regulations? Every rule applied equally to everyone? That's exactly what I said. If you won't remove these eyesores voluntarily, then I will make sure every rule in the book is enforced until you realize it's easier to just do what I say. I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Okay, Denise, I will comply with your demand and I will make sure everyone else does too. Every property, every facility, every rule, equal enforcement for everyone. She huffed, apparently pleased that I was seeing things her way, and marched off. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. See, here's the thing about demanding full compliance with all rules and regulations. That is a sword that cuts both ways, and Denise had just handed me that sword and asked me to swing it. I spent the next several weeks doing research. I reviewed the HOA CC&Rs and bylaws in detail. I looked up local, state and federal accessibility requirements and I visited every common area in the community with a measuring tape, a camera and a notepad. I documented everything and oh boy, did I find some things. The community center, which was built about 15 years ago, it had steps leading up to the entrance, no ramp, no accessible entrance of any kind, and here's where it got really interesting. Our community's common areas were built after the Fair Housing Act's accessibility requirements went into effect in 1991. Any common areas in covered housing developments, which includes any multifamily housing with 4 or more units built after that date, need to meet specific accessibility standards. On top of that, because the community center was rented out for birthday parties, HOA meetings and other events that were advertised to the public, it arguably fell under ADA Title III as a place of public accommodation. Either way, the HOA had legal obligations they were clearly not meeting. The pool area was surrounded by a gate that was too narrow for a wheelchair to fit through. Furthermore, the bathroom in the pool house had no accessible stall, the pathways were uneven and cracked in multiple places. In addition, the park had curbs with no curb cuts and the picnic tables were all fixed bench style with no accessible seating. The playground equipment was only accessible by climbing stairs with no ramp or transfer platform. The HOA was in violation of numerous Fair Housing Act accessibility requirements and potentially ADA requirements as well. But Denise wanted everyone to comply with all regulations equally, right? Perfect. I'd make sure her own facilities complied too. I compiled my findings into a formal complaint. I included photographs, measurements, citations to the specific regulations being violated, and I sent copies to the HOA board, the property management company, and the Fair Housing Office for my state. Then I contacted a disability rights attorney, and yeah, my attorney was amazing. She took one look at my documentation and got this gleam in her eye that I can only describe as predatory joy. She told me I had an extremely strong case not just for the harassment I'd experienced, but also for the accessibility violations in the common areas and the pattern of discriminatory conduct. We filed a complaint with HUD, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, which handles Fair Housing Act violations, and we also filed a lawsuit against the HOA. This lawsuit alleged discrimination under the Fair Housing Act, harassment, failure to provide reasonable accommodations, and violations of accessibility requirements. We asked for compensatory damages, punitive damages, and injunctive relief requiring the HOA to bring all common areas into compliance. Denise's response was to send me yet another violation notice, this time for having an excessive number of vehicles because a friend had parked in front of my house while visiting. She also tried to fine me for my trash cans being visible on pickup day. My attorney added those to the lawsuit as evidence of retaliatory harassment. The discovery process was enlightening. We subpoenaed records from the HOA and found emails between Denise and other board members where she referred to my ramp as that eyesore and said that she wanted to make an example of me so other residents wouldn't try to take advantage of disability laws. In one email, she literally wrote, "If we let him keep that ramp, next thing you know, everyone will be claiming they need special treatment." And she also had emails discussing my wheelchair. She had written to the property manager complaining about that thing he leaves on his patio and asking how they could force me to keep it inside where no one has to look at it. My attorney was practically rubbing her hands together with glee when she showed me these. The HOA's insurance company got involved and strongly urged the board to settle. They could see what was coming. Denise apparently threw a fit in the board meeting about it, but even her two allies on the board could see the writing on the wall. The evidence was overwhelming and a jury trial would be a disaster for them. We settled about 8 months after filing the lawsuit. The terms were very favorable to me. The HOA was required to pay me $150,000. That included compensatory damages for the harassment and emotional distress, but also statutory damages under the Fair Housing Act. My attorney explained that cases with this level of documented bad faith, including the police incident, the unsightly object violation for my wheelchair, and the retaliation after I requested accommodations often result in higher settlements because the other side knows a jury would be furious and courts want to send a message. The HOA was also required to pay my attorney's fees, which came to about $45,000, but here's the best part, the injunctive relief. The HOA was required to bring all common areas into compliance with the Fair Housing Act accessibility requirements within 18 months. They had to install a ramp at the community center, widen the gate at the pool, add an accessible bathroom, fix the pathways, and add curb cuts throughout the community, and install accessible picnic tables and playground equipment. The total cost to the HOA for these modifications? Over $300,000. And all of that because Denise demanded that everyone comply with all regulations equally. I was just complying with her demand. She wanted equal enforcement of all the rules? Well, she got it. Oh, and by the way, all violation notices against me were rescinded, my fines were refunded, and the HOA was now prohibited from taking any enforcement action against accessibility features or mobility devices. My ramp stayed exactly where it was. As for Denise, well, she resigned from the board about 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, but that was not the end of it. A group of homeowners started a petition for her recall election. It took a few months to get enough signatures and scheduled a special meeting during which Denise tried everything to delay or discredit the effort. She blamed me, claimed she had been protecting the neighborhood's interests, even threatened to sue the petition organizers for defamation, but nobody was buying it. When the vote finally happened, she lost by a landslide, and the final count was something like 70% in favor of removal. I found out later what had happened with my original ramp approval. The property management company handles routine architectural requests and only escalates unusual ones to the board. My ramp request had been approved at the management level without going to the full board because it met all the standard criteria, as most accessibility modification requests do. Denise apparently believed that nothing should be approved without her personal sign-off, even though that's not how the process worked and never had been. She had been blindsided by my ramp appearing without her permission, and she took it as a personal affront. A lot of my neighbors have thanked me since all this went down. Several of them have elderly parents who visit regularly and can now actually access the community center. A family with a kid in a wheelchair moved in last year and was able to use the pool for the first time this summer because of these modifications. One elderly resident who uses a walker told me she had been asking for curb cuts for years and no one had ever listened to her. I complied with Denise's demands and I made sure she had to comply too. Every regulation, equal enforcement, she just did not expect the regulations would apply to her as well. And the next one is a beautiful petty revenge story. It is titled My Dad's Petty Christmas Revenge. This happened many Christmases ago, but it still makes me laugh whenever I remember it and when this time of year rolls around. It's technically my dad's petty revenge on his older sister, but he's technologically challenged older gentleman and has no idea Reddit exists, so I'm posting on his behalf. Also for context, we live in the UK, so my dad and his sister get along most of the time, but are ultimately very different people. Her and my uncle are wealthy, whereas my dad often struggles to make ends meet, even more so now that he's physically disabled. Even though he's had a harder life, my dad has always been an optimistic guy with a great sense of humor. My aunt, on the other hand, is very serious and her wealth has made her quite snooty and unable to relate to the hardships my dad deals with, which is a major point of contention between them. This always becomes more stark at Christmas time when my dad often cannot even afford to give gifts as lavish as hers, and she acts very resentful of that. One Christmas, my dad was looking for a gift to give my aunt and uncle and found a pair of animatronic singing dogs in a charity shop. They were vintage, very silly, and made my dad, sister and I laugh a lot. My dad knew my uncle would also find them hilarious, so he bought them as a gift for him and my aunt. They were a hit at Christmas. We, my dad, his girlfriend, my sister and I, traveled down to my aunt's house for Christmas Day and unveiled the dogs to much applause. My uncle laughed himself to tears, their cat tried to attack the dogs as they sang, which made everyone laugh harder, and we all had a great time. My aunt, however, had a forced smile on her face the whole time and was mumbling something to herself about not having anywhere to put them. For reference, her house is huge, like 6 bathrooms and a heated swimming pool, which was huge as well. There was plenty of space for the dogs. It was very obvious that she just hated them with every fiber of her being. When it was time for us to leave, my dad's girlfriend started packing our things into the car and we all said our goodbyes. Unbeknownst to us, my aunt shoved the dogs into our car while my dad's girlfriend's back was turned. We didn't realize they'd come back with us until we were home. It put a dampener on our otherwise fun day. We were all a bit put out except for my dad. That is, he just laughed and rolled his eyes, clearly used to his sister's behavior. My dad has always been a bit of a jokester, so he began to plan his petty revenge. He found a fancy empty box that had once contained a posh luxury brand of beauty products, something his girlfriend had received as a Christmas gift from a friend. He put the dogs inside it along with a handwritten note, then he packaged it up, wrote my aunt's address on it, and dropped it off at the post office. We never knew how my aunt reacted to it, nor saw those singing dogs again, but my family and I all have a good chuckle whenever we imagine her reaction to opening what she thought was an expensive gift only to see the dogs again and read what my dad wrote. It said, "A dog is for life, not just for Christmas." And yeah guys, thank you for watching.